Welcome to session number 5, which starts with the feedback from the breakout sessions. As you're all aware, we've had two parallel breakout sessions yesterday, one on environmental risk assessment and the other one on societal impact of animals. And today we had two breakout sessions, one on animal welfare and the other one on collaboration with academia. Normally I would take them in the order that we did them in the program, but since my esteemed colleague Tony will need to leave for another very important meeting, I would like to give him the floor first, and he will provide feedback on breakout session 4.2, collaboration with academia. Tony, please.
Yeah, many thanks, Chair. And indeed, colleagues, just to give you a sort of nutshell of what we went through in the breakout session itself. I had the task to moderate the session, so that's always the easy bit, but I was assisted then with three colleagues, which you hopefully know. One is Ralph Herald, who sort of heads up the Reg Science and Academic Office Liaison function here at the agency. Another is Anna Vidal from within the veterinary sort of division, and again on coordination of regulatory science sort of projects. And then the third, of course, is Valentin Nicorescu, and he, has got more of an emphasis on efficacy of veterinary medicines and indeed support to the efficacy working party of the CVMP. So they were sort of tasked to sort of lay out pretty much, what our offer here is with regards to collaboration with academia. And if I can just maybe the best thing I can do is just to summarize each of those three interventions as best I can. Ralph pretty much kicked off with the idea of introducing the agency's strategic view with regards to academic engagement and the fact that academia is seen as a strategic partner, and we very much want to foster a two-way communication, of which then this actual workshop is in itself an example of our attempts to reach out. He then introduced the idea that we have two sort of primary areas of interest. One is regulatory science research gaps, which sort of underpins everything we as a regulator, a scientific regulator, seek to do. And also then academics or academia as a source of innovative development, be that either methods, products, or indeed expertise on sort of cutting edge science. And that's therefore an incredibly useful, if not essential, resource to ensure a healthy regulatory system. He then went on then to talk about the sort of practical interfaces that's very, very much possible with regards to individuals, groups, consortia, and even now we're reflecting on not-for-profit organizations, public-private partnerships, etc. So that was pretty much setting up the scene, the strategic sort of view on the absolute strategic need to engage with academia, and then the broader possibilities to engage. Anna then continued in her particular session. Then she sort of drilled down on the regulatory science collaboration, and in particular then a publication that when we put it out into the public domain, we really didn't know, was this of any interest, was it going to have any influence, but it was the regulatory science research needs, which we published less than a couple of years ago now. And in the vet domain, there was sort of 40 sort of individual topics that were identified as research needs. And one of our main motivations to publish that was it was a byproduct of a very rich consultation process we had with all stakeholders that went on in the formation of our regulatory science strategy to 25. And as part of that consultation process, we asked people, if you had unlimited powers, unlimited resources, what sort of gaps would really help? What are the knowledge gaps that are preventing you from doing an even better job in your sort of area of expertise? So we had an awful lot of that information, and we thought that to sit on that, in our archives here was not a very sensible thing to do. So that was the genesis then of putting out those regulatory science research needs. to engage with a dialogue then with whoever wants to take them up. And in particular, it was a mixture of who's doing the research itself, ergo the interest of academia, but also very importantly, who's got the money to fund the actual research. So that's the reach out to the funders in terms of the Horizon Europe colleagues, RTD, etc., but also the national funding, which is also another very rich source, and also a tiny direct funding, which we have ourselves here in the agency. It's absolutely modest, but we actually do have a direct funding capability, and Anna described that, and indeed a number of organizations that have won or succeeded in the tender process for that, and an ongoing study that's there in the realms of big data being applied in the vet sort of environment. So that was the sort of second sort of pillar that was described. And then Valentin took up the story just to complete the picture from the macro, the regulatory science collaboration, down to how do we, we as a system, as an agency and a network have said we want to foster the uptake of innovative methods and innovation itself in the development of medicines and healthcare solutions then for use by veterinarians and in the field. And he described a sort of a stepped approach to this, and it ranged from the SME sort of offering. So the fact if you're an academic with a sort of spin out type function, really micro SME, could be in some sort of technology transfer sort of park that often surrounds some of the universities in Europe now. You are able to register as an SME, and what are the advantages that downstream from such a registration? The immediate one is transparency, that you exist and you have networking and partnership opportunities. But the other is that you have preferential access or assisted access to a range of our downstream services, and particularly things like the Innovation Task Force and the scientific advice procedures. So he went on to describe the role of the Innovation Task Force sort of as an early point of contact, free of charge point of contact, that is hopefully guiding either a route to the market or a route to qualify a methodology that could be used in medicines development. And indeed then putting the sort of the scientific challenge that the innovator has been identified, putting that in contact with specialized expertise from across the network that can assist in guiding your pathway to market or at least commercialization of your product. So that was very much the description of the ITF. He then went on to describe also then the scientific advice procedure. So that's also stepping up on the product specific and seeing where does that fit with regards to guiding the sort of product development. And he also then highlighted then a lot of that individual product contact, be it ITF or scientific advice, results in broad quality, safety, efficacy, scientific guidelines. So he described the genesis of the scientific guideline, the corpus of scientific guidelines to date, but also how then do we renew and update these, because that's always a constant challenge for us as regulators. And he was particularly emphasizing the role of public consultation and the fact that not only is the input welcomed, but it's absolutely essential, and it's treated very sincerely and seriously by the CVMP and their working party colleagues, in that the comments are made public, and are how we deal with the comments are also addressed, whether they're accepted in part, or indeed rejected for whatever reason. And that sort of collaborative process, building up what we hope are state-of-the-art relevant guidelines, scientific guidelines, was pretty much then where we finished. That was the sort of contact, two-way exchange with regards to input. But there was the more general, he then described the sort of dissemination processes that we have. So we have a whole series of newsletters. And again, if you're a small, medium-sized operator, academic even, you can get access to things like the SME newsletters. In fact, they're freely available to anybody, really, but they're targeted at that sort of small development type community. And then there are the more general, the more broad communications, chief amongst which are the veterinary highlights that Ivo Claassen features typically on the front cover when it's ever disseminated. So pretty much then between the three, we had the macro view, the regulatory science project coordination with Anna, and then the stepped sort of innovation support with Valentin. I hope that's done justice to what we did, Chair.
No, thank you very much, Tony. And for a comprehensive summary, I would say. And he's trying to steal my phone now, which is not really appreciated. So unless there are any burning questions for Tony on this one, I would like to excuse you and please continue to the participatory budget meeting.
Yes, thank you very much.
So next on is breakout session 3.1, which was yesterday afternoon, on veterinary medicines and the environment. And to that, I would like to give the floor to Ricardo Carpetto.
Yep, thank you. We had a very interesting session yesterday in the afternoon discussing about veterinary medicines in the environment. We had three presenters, Michael Empel, Haru Kronis, and Ivo Roesink. And well, I'm going to try to summarize here. I have some bullet points written down here to summarize the conclusions, or which in my view are the main conclusions. And sorry if I left anything away out or if I misunderstood something. But well, these are the summary, the conclusions. Starting with Michael Empel's presentation, it was made clear that we have had an environmental risk assessment for veterinary medicines for decades. It's not anything new. We have been doing that for several years. It's also important to note that all the medicines that we authorize under the veterinary framework undergo an environmental risk assessment, all of them. But depending on the anticipated risks, that environmental risk assessment will be more complex or less complex. The less complex part would be what we call a first phase, phase one assessment. Okay, this phase one assessment only takes care about the exposure level. And we consider that if the exposure is low enough, the risks or the potential risks would also be low, and it wouldn't be necessary to go further in the environmental risk assessment. So that is what we call the phase one, and it's aligned with international standards, basically the VACH, that is an agreement between United States, Japan, and Europe. So we follow the same rules in that part. This phase one, the medicines that stay in the phase one can nevertheless, if there are reasons to think that they might pose a risk, even if the exposure is very low, we can ask for a phase two assessment. That is the difficult one. In the application of what we call however clause. That is a possibility that is always there and has been applied sometimes, not very often, because it has to be the exception and not a rule to apply this however clause, but it has happened in the past. What happens if we have a medicine which exposure is considered to be relevant to the environment? Then we need to go to a phase two assessment. In this phase two assessment, the applicant, the person who is want to get the authorization of the medicine, has to make a risk calculation. In the different environmental compartments, water, soil, etc., they have to provide studies of toxicity of the active substance to organisms living in those compartments, and they have to calculate the risks. Ultimately, when you have a conclusion on the environmental risk, like saying that the medicine might pose a risk or not to the environment, you have to include that into what we call a benefit risk assessment. We have also to take into account the benefit of the authorization, the efficacy issues, together with the environmental risk and other risks that there might be for the product, like user safety, consumer safety, the target animal safety, etc. The issue of the monographs appeared during the discussion. The monographs, for those of you that are not aware about the term, is something that we have been discussing for years, and it would be a system that would imply a single assessment around Europe for a substance, and then using the outcome of that assessment in the authorization of several products, instead of having a product-based assessment. That is what we had before with the directive. Well, from the monograph system is, as I said, a concept that appeared some years ago. There is nothing definitive yet, but the concept already appears in the new regulation of veterinary medicines, in the Article 156, and the Commission is on the topic. They have already carried out a feasibility study as requested by the regulation, and it's an ongoing thing. What was agreed that it might be beneficial in some cases, it might not be necessary in some other cases, and in any case, it won't be an easy pathway. Maybe useful and beneficial, but never easy. But as I said, it's something ongoing, and there's not much we can say now about that. Nevertheless, the environmental risk assessment is open, of course, to scientific and societal evolution. And as an example for that, we have the pets parasiticide reflection paper that the CVMP is currently discussing. And that presentation was taken care of by Haru Krones, that took us the main highlights of this draft reflection paper on parasiticides, and I will try to summarize that again. First of all, the pets population in the European Union has grown a lot. We don't have very exact or clear figures, but it might be around over 200 million animals in the European Union kept as pets, what makes that about every 2 persons there will be 1 pet. And the figures are growing very fast. So there are thousands of medicines authorized with very different mode of actions. Some of them are topical, some of them are systemically acting substances. We have also a very important number of active substances used for treating parasitic diseases in pets. We talk about 40 active substances, and it's important to remark that it's not only fipronil and imidacloprid, because those are maybe the most widely used and most under discussion, but there are 38 active substances else besides, and we shouldn't forget about those others. So considering the big amount of pets in the European Union, around 200 million animals, and the growing population, and that the treatment of parasitic diseases is something that we do at the same time, because it depends on the season of the year. Maybe the initial assumption that the environmental risks from these medicines would be negligible because of the expected low exposure. Maybe that original view is not valid anymore, and that is what this reflection paper is aiming to explore and to disentangle. Most of the exposure routes of the medicines used as parasiticides in pets end up in surface water, so maybe we can assume that surface waters are the main environmental compartment, and they're of higher exposure, where higher exposure can be expected. We have monitoring data, not as much as we would like to have, but we do have some monitoring data in surface water, and there we find that the active compounds that are used in parasiticides can be found in European waters, and also in waters abroad, out of the European Union. We have trouble, nevertheless, when we find these substances, on which is the source of these substances, because in many cases, in most of the cases, we share the active substances that you use as parasiticide between different frameworks, and a substance that is used as parasiticide can also be used as a pesticide and can also be used as a biocide. So whenever you find it in the environment, you always have to question where is it coming from. And here we had some disagreement between the two of the speakers, because one of the speakers, Ivo Rosing, was saying that if you take samples from sewage treatment plants and you find there, for example, imidacloprid, you can ascertain almost 100% sure that it will come from a pet. And we had our other views expressing that that the origin as a pesticide or biocide cannot be ruled out, even if it's coming from an urban environment. So disagreement there. The reflection paper that I mentioned about parasiticides of the CVMP is not yet adopted, but in here we review all the information that we have available, and it will be adopted before 2024. Which is just to let you know, but there is a draft that is already can be already consulted online, but the final version will be before 2024. The conclusions of this paper are yet to be discussed and drafted, but well, as I already anticipated, the source has to be disentangled. We need more monitoring, etc. And we had this last presentation that was carried out by Ivo Rosing, where he gave a wider picture of environmental risk assessment, remarking that unintended effects can happen and indeed do happen. And he gave us the example of a crayfish catastrophe in the UK due to the use of parasiticides in sheep. And also Michael Empel mentioned the issue of the diclofenac in India and the decline, dramatic decline of the vultures population there. So sometimes we have medicines that are not intended for doing something, and because of their presence in the environment, we might see very evident effects in the environment, and that is important to take into account. The current environmental risk assessment is focusing on endpoints that might not be adapted to the current situation. For example, new modes of action, and we don't take into account a combination of chemical stressors. In the old days, maybe in the beginning of the this chemistry that we are still using, the effects were basically knocking down animals and parasites in this case, but there are more and more examples of substances that do not necessarily kill the animal but impede their development or make things more difficult for them. And our environmental risk assessment might not be adapted to that kind of mode of actions. So Dr. Rosen concluded that it would be necessary to move to an environmental risk assessment that takes into account not only the effects that are obvious, like lethality or reproductive failure, the things that it's easy for us to see, but that we should move to an environmental risk assessment that considers also less evident effects, as for example, behavioral effects, and the interlink between these effects with the ecosystem interaction. And here Dr. Rosen gave some examples on how impeding the ability to feed of some animals that were exposed to chemicals or medicines would affect their survival in the long term. Also the ability to mate, and how that would affect the populations of that organism, or also because of these behavioral changes, how could they be more vulnerable to the effect of predators. So I think that's all from my side, and thank you very much to all those of you who attended to that session, and it was really interesting, and that's all I had to say. So back to you, Ivo. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ricardo. Again, don't know if there's any questions or any additions to be made on the report of Ricardo on that session. Looking around in the room, I can't see what's going on online, but I think thanks a lot for a very comprehensive overview. I think Very well taken. So breakout session 3.2 was on the impact of animals in society. I was the moderator for that session, so I'm afraid I have to provide you with the feedback on that session. It's a session, for those of you that haven't seen it, the recording will be made available. There was 40 people connected online, and of course the people in the room. It's certainly worth watching it because of the good presentations in there and the interesting and sometimes philosophical discussion that we had towards the end. 3 presentations, one by Karel Dumarchi-Sava's Health for Animals on the societal impact for animals. The other one, Impact of Animals in Society by Nancy de Brienne, and then Consumer Safety and MRLs, a more technical presentation by Sebastian. Karel focused very much on, let's say, the future developments and the impacts really of animals in society, looking at positive impacts, wild animals, farmed animals, pets, and even working animals may have on society, but also on the negative impacts, animals as a source for disease spread, emission of methane, for example, also the consumption of resources that maybe could be used otherwise, and to the extent of agricultural destruction with reference to wild pigs, elephants, river crayfish, and wolves. So you mentioned the crayfish. There's positives and negatives to that, I would say. Overall, looking at social trends impacting animals, there's indeed, the growing population with a growing demand for animal produce, a competition for land use, the environment, social developments with pets becoming more part of the family. And in that context, very elegantly, Karel also mentioned that we're now facing with a different type of pet population, namely aging pets, which do create new needs for veterinary medicinal products, because aging pets, like aging people, are being confronted with diseases that we would normally not treat. And this in return leads to innovation, anti-cancer drugs, etc. But at the same time, it is more spending by pet owners on keeping their pets alive and healthy as long as possible. An important trend that looking towards the future is that both the livestock population and the pet population are expected to increase in the future, and hence the need for medicinal products. Also, an interesting case was made on how food security, so having enough food, is linked to the livelihood of people that are involved in that area, and particularly in of course, developing areas where the need for more animal protein is being created, and how that is important to deal with malnutrition as well. He discussed interesting topics like there is enough food, it just needs to be better distributed, and acknowledging that, but the distribution itself is not easy. Avoid animal protein and consume plant-based alternative meat and milks, but that again, those, let's say, elements for discussion have been discussed in that area. In the end, however, there was also a strong plea for sustainability, and I think we'll come back to that because that was the topic of the discussion towards the end of the meeting. Relation to regulation and innovation, obviously a plea for global harmonization. Good rules are good, and basically stating that meeting increasingly higher regulatory requirements will make it more expensive and therefore less interesting to put certain products on the market. That's a global issue that's being recognized. However, a lot of innovations are taking place in the development of new types of vaccines, parasite control, diagnostics, nutritional products, replacement of antibiotics, and digital technologies is one of the important developments that could help us in using veterinary medicinal products in a more intelligent way. Then Nancy de Brienne's presentation, again looking into a lot of trends in the use of veterinary medicines, but also in veterinary practice, and highlighting an increasing interest also in animal welfare. And I think that is an important element and has been discussed in a separate session. But for example, the Federation of Veterinarians in Europe came up with 10 key recommendations for a better animal welfare legislation, including husbandry systems, cage-free farming, more animal welfare friendly farrowing systems, better protect species not yet covered, so like companion animals, donkeys, rabbits, rules on transportation of animals, particularly cats and dogs, slaughter of stunt animals, only just to mention a few. I think also identifying trends in availability or shortages of medicines, which where the discussion was not about shortages per se, but having products available in markets where they are needed, which is obviously a problem for veterinarians that want to have access to those problems. Critical shortages, vaccines observed for several species, antibiotics, and especially narrow spectrum or lower class antibiotics, and we need tools especially for essential indications. I think the conclusions of Nancy's presentation was, with a changing world, it is necessary for the regulatory framework to follow. Key challenges for One Health, animal health and welfare, again, shortages, the rising threats of zoonotic diseases and pandemics, because we all know that a lot of the new emerging diseases originate in the environment or in animals, the need for more preventive tools and alternatives to antimicrobials, and the need to incentivize investments. We all know that the veterinary medicinal products market is much smaller than the human market, and that in turn has consequences for the innovative power. Solutions on the horizon. New EU regulatory framework provides that the possibilities, global EU and global initiatives to boost pandemic preparedness, and to work collaboratively with regulatory flexibility to guard an effective benefit-risk balance and to ensure veterinarians have the tools and the medicines to treat their patients. Then we had a presentation by Sébastien Giraud on consumer safety maximum residue limits, explaining why it is important that we have these maximum residue limits, how they are being established, and how they are being included in the authorization process in order to warrant good consumer protection. Moving to the discussions. Discussion we had was very much linked to trends in livestock production and with the growing population and how to manage that. And we had a very interesting discussion ending with, like I said, more philosophical questions. What are the big issues that we would really need to look at? Let's say, how do we see the future 5 to 10 years from now? What will be the main challenges? And the panel in its totality agreed that the main challenge would come from indeed climate change and the challenges that poses, and where and the need to optimize livestock production in order to reduce the environmental impact, to look at products. I wouldn't call them necessarily veterinary medicinal products, because there's not a claim that would benefit the animals directly, but products that could help in reducing emissions is one of those topics. But also to move or invest in local production in those areas where indeed animal protein is needed. Interestingly enough, in one of the presentations, there was a link to the world population, and the world population has tripled over the past 70 years, which, when you think about it, is mind-blowing. However, at the same time, in Europe, so in the past 70 years, the European population has only grown from 650 million to 750 million. So it's a minor increase, whereas the livestock production at the same time has exploded there as well. So maybe we should not focus on. I think the trend is that the livestock production in Europe potentially may shrink, but it may grow elsewhere. And maybe we should look at can this be done in a balanced way, and that would require a paradigm shift of how we look at livestock production. And I realized that the Netherlands, and I'm Dutch national, is a country that exports the technology that is very much focusing on intensive livestock farming. We're the second largest exporter of agricultural products produced, including that technology, in the world. So there's an economic part to it as well. But looking forward to continuing those discussions, I think it was a very interesting session. And I think the trend is how can we, or the objective should be how can we come to a more sustainable situation in terms of livestock production that would serve indeed the people, planet, and the profit side. I'm not sure whether I missed anything essential, so I'm looking at Nancy and Karel, and I've got thumbs up, so I think this was the summary of yesterday's. So highly recommended to see the recording. And with that, I would like to hand over to Rafaela for a summary of the last session, which was animal welfare. Please, Rafaela.
Thank you, Ivo. So we put together a few slides. So first of all, I mean, I really would like to thank the presenters for their really very informative presentations, but also the audience, because we online and in the room, because we had really a good discussion with really a range of diverse questions. So that was the session on animal welfare, and the two first presentations, which were given by Dr. Sonja Beken and Dr. Sarah Adler-Findelt, were really focusing on advancing acceptance of 3R's testing approaches for regulatory testing of medicinal products in the EU. And they also went into introducing also the newly established EMA Trias Working Party, with Sarah giving a little bit more insight into the topics related to veterinary medicinal products. And then really to cover more broadly in different angles of animal welfare, we had a presentation by Dr. Spulder on recent developments in livestock welfare science. Can I have the next one? So we heard, first of all, of what are the drivers for the 3Rs in general. So it's not only ethical drivers, but also best science, and also what are the drivers in the EU in relation to the regulatory context, but also it was mentioned the European Citizens Initiatives on really getting rid of animal testing and the parliament resolutions. We had a bit of a historical perspective about EMA's commitment in this area, so it is not new. EMA worked already in that area through its expert groups, the JEC3R and JEC3R in the past, and some achievements were presented by these from the past. Then it went into introducing the new 3Rs working party, that is really a strategic and visible working party that aims to monitor and also supervise and coordinate EMA's 3Rs activity, and we saw at its ambitious work plan, which is also expected to grow. So I really advise you really to look at the recording and the presentation, as we don't have really the time to go into that. But also, Sonia mentioned that there will be a multi-stakeholder meeting next year, and there, I mean, you will learn about the progress, what has been done by the working party. Then the next. Then we had some, well, the working party is covering topics that are common to both human and veterinary medicinal products, but also some that are specific to either human and veterinary medicinal products. And we had Sarah giving us some example of a specific working project in the area of veterinary products that are in place to promote the 3Rs through the development and update of guidelines, guidance documents, and participation in 3Rs related working and drafting groups. And in the next, we had some really concrete example, just to get also a flavor of what is the working party really doing. Some projects are related, really follow-up project of what was already done in the past, but of course there is new science, and available documents need to be revision. One is the reflection paper on current regulatory testing requirements for veterinary medicinal products and opportunities for implementation of the 3Rs. So we saw that there are already many opportunities in place, and so quite a lot to be done in the area. So here I'm focusing just to the vet-related projects. And also the groups foreseen a revision of the veterinary products batch release testing requirements with regards to the application of the 3Rs. And also it will explore possibility to make the adherence to 3Rs principle during the authorization process is more transparent. So this is quite a new topic. And also inclusion of in vitro methods for skin irritation and sensitization in the guideline on user safety for topical administered veterinary medicinal products. So this is an area where there are several OECD guidelines already on in vitro methods. So it's timely to update this guidance. So if we can have the next. So discussion points cover the topics I've mentioned, but we had also some discussion on possibility of data sharing by the industry, how to measure the impact of legislation and guidance changes, and okay, this is quite challenging. An example was made in the area of human medicine for carcinogenicity, where there was an attempt to measure this impact. Yes, how to get confidence and how to implement these 3Rs methods in the regulatory context. And here, I mean, qualification criteria, of course, were identified as being really key for that. And the working party would really work further on qualification, on this qualification criteria for specific context of use. So, and this is also important also to have these discussions at the global level, not only at the EU level. Context of use, so it was really underlined that context of use is important because then qualification needs to be specific. There are very different contexts of use for the context of use of the specific substance. Also Michael was there and really he took the advantage to again explain really the role of the innovative task force, which was just mentioned before, which is it's really a good way to strengthen early engagement between the agency and different stakeholders as method developers. There was a question again, or does implementation of new methods may affect efficacy? And of course, I mean, validation qualification is again key here. So next one. So some take-home messages from the first two presentations and in relation to the 3Rs. So historically, the EU regulatory network has been open to the 3R. EMA is clearly committed to the 3Rs. And the working party is EMA official 3Rs hub, really the entry point. EMA 3R strategies and the ambitious work plan are in place to support this work. And also the engagement and open dialogue with interested 3R stakeholders was really stressed, and it's really put at the center of the work of the working party. The close collaboration, as I mentioned, between the working party and the innovation task force in relation to 3R issues. And as we heard yesterday also, I mean, this is important in all areas. The global regulatory collaboration is key. Also, I mean, and also across sectors, not only within the sector. So then we moved on and we really changed the topic. And if I can have the next slide. And we had Dr. Spolder going really into the recent developments in livestock welfare science. Of course, there is an interest by EMA also in these areas and to cover different angles of welfare. He gave us a historical perspective of animal welfare in a very short time. He talked about, the availability now of new assessment techniques related to assess animal welfare, not only related to physiology, but also to the emotional states of the animals. He also talked about good housing, promoting resilience of the animals to diseases, and he gave the example of different strategies to reduce antimicrobial use. And then he also talked about different animal welfare initiatives at the EU level. There was, we had some discussion points raised by the online audience and here in the room on importance to integrate the farmers' views and their ideas, also to implement animal welfare, and also that this is more, it should be seen as an implementation of welfare issues. It might be considered, challenging and difficult for farming, but it should be seen as an evolution where it is key to have all stakeholders involved. And also, of course, the global dimension is important, and having similar standards in place globally as well. If I can have the next one. And then these were the take-home messages from Hans in this regards. So times are changing, and they're changing quite fast. He made reference to, okay, we're slowly moving from reducing suffering to the notion of a life worth living for the animals. And it was also mentioned just by Ivo in his report before, that there will be a new EU welfare legislation that will be proposed. And although the legislation in place is quite extensive already, I mean, gaps have been identified, and also there is also new science to support it. And that was also triggered by the European Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy to have this, and also European citizen initiatives also that took place in this area. It was mentioned that EFSA drafted several opinions to support the new legislations. They are very pretty ambitious, and they focus only on the animal issues. Then welfare labeling of products will increase in the EU. And already some member states are embracing that. Animal health and animal welfare experts still have a lot to learn from each other. So it's important that there is here an interaction, although, I mean, these are two different areas, but good that they work together. And the EU will support research quite extensively through a 360 million euro partnership on animal health and welfare. So I come here to the end, and then so we can see that both in the area of the 3 Rs and livestock welfare, I mean, there is a lot to come up, and then we're really looking forward to see this progress in the short term and also more in the longer term. So I thank again the presenters and the audience for the constructive discussion. And I don't know if the speakers want to add something, if I missed anything. Thank you.
No, thank you, Rafaela, for a very comprehensive overview again. I think it covers everything that has been said. There's one question online, and it's a technical question, but has there been an update on the abolishment of the pyrogen test? And I'm not sure who can take this question. Can you?
Well, we didn't go into these details here.
Maybe Sonia?
Yeah, we didn't indeed tackle this topic, but there was a large-scale EPAA conference, I don't remember exactly when, but a few months ago, where all the state of advancement with regards to pyrogenicity testing was discussed, and it was clear that from a European perspective, we are very advanced, as the European Pharmacopoeia will remove the requirement for in vivo testing from their monographs and their general chapters. So there the point is more the international perspective, how to implement this more in other countries outside of the EU, and what kind of catalyzing role could Europe play in this matter. But for us, it's the in vivo testing is deleted already.
But I guess that applies to a number of things where we in Europe are, walking ahead of the troops, I would say. And how do we then come to a global implementation of these things? Okay, thank you. Looking around, if there's no other questions for any of the presenters on what has been presented, and also see in the chat that there's nothing. I would like to close this meeting, and I would again recommend to everyone that has not attended a session in person or virtually that the recordings are made available. This morning I had to choose between two sessions. I I wanted to be in the session on alternatives and animal welfare, but I was directed to the other session, so I'm pretty sure I will watch this session. And then before we break, the Veterinary Awareness Day is not over yet. This afternoon, starting at 1:30, we have I think, a very important session highlighting what the contribution of the EMA and the EU network is to veterinary medicine science and regulation. So it will be chaired by Johan Schefferly, who's the chair of the Committee for Veterinary Medicinal Products, with presentations of the vice chair and the chair of the Scientific Advice Working Party, Frida Wikström. Perspectives of the manufacturers of veterinary medicines by Frederik Schutte, and the perspective from the side of the European Medicines Agency by Jordi Torren. So I hope to see you all back at 1:30, either here in person or online, for the afternoon session, and then for the closing that we anticipate will take place around 3 o'clock. Thanks a lot.